Welcome to Executive Access, your home for real talk with industry leaders. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, I am speaking with Melanie Stith, former healthcare executive and current CEO and founder of Culture Wins. Melanie's career path is interesting, from attorney to HR professional to government relations. Melanie didn't mind switching lanes often to follow her interests and to grow. This gave her broad business perspective and experience. We spoke about each of these transitions, with the very latest being extremely big, what it took to leave a high-powered executive position at a large healthcare system and start her own business. We had a very heartfelt conversation about what led her to her latest transition and how she learned to define success in a new way and with intention. I appreciate Melanie sharing what this pursuit of purpose looks like for her. She shared the leadership principles that led her to success and a few mistakes along the way, including how to tame her tendency to seek perfection. Melanie is an authentic leader, finding joy as she explores this next phase in her career. Listeners are going to learn from her leadership advice, and those considering their own career transitions will be especially grateful for how transparently she shares her story. Let's dive in. Melanie, welcome to the Executive Access. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. You are the president and founder of Culture Wins and a former healthcare exec, former attorney. You're also a principal advisor for the McNair Group, which does organizational effectiveness. So lots in there to unpack. So you have a really diverse background. I can't wait for my listeners to hear about your career path and some of the decisions that you've made. But first, I like to start with the old growth mindset question. What are you doing these days, personally or professionally, to learn and grow?
Well, I think we'll obviously talk a lot about this today, but the last year has been an incredible journey for me in terms of growth. So professionally, obviously, I transitioned careers. And so I've been reading everything I possibly can and taking courses and kind of trying to lean into the next phase of my career. And then personally, I've also been just really focused on my faith and leaning into some mentoring with women in my church group and trying to better myself. So I think it's really been a year of personal reflection and growth, and it's all about learning.
Amazing. Yeah, you and I first met through a friend, and you were leaving this big executive job at Roper St. Francis and contemplating this big transition. And I remember meeting you and we instantly hit it off, but I was like, everything that she's going through, I feel like I have gone through and I'm still going through.
And I was so thankful for
I was
you
thankful
in that
too.
moment.
We both learned a lot in that conversation.
Right.
So, well, you've had a lot of big pivots in your career. With all of my guests, I don't always walk through the entire, career, but if you could quickly walk us through, because what's fascinating is I meet a lot of people who, pretty much stay in one lane. My lane was sales and go to market in a tech company for most of my career. You've had many different pivots from, you started off, I believe, as an attorney, you pivoted into HR leadership, and then you're like, I want to try government relations and all kinds of different things, which is a little bit unusual from what I see. If you could just talk about just the big pivots in your career, just to anchor our audience on your background, I think that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. Honestly, I grew up always thinking I was going to be an HR executive. My mother was an HR executive for a large international company, and I was always her plus one when we went to HR conferences. So my passion has always been about helping people and organizations be their very best. But when I was in college, honestly, I had this speaker come in and talk about possibly partnering law and human resources. And I thought, hey, that's a cool combination. Let me go try that. It didn't hurt that my then boyfriend at the time was also going to law school. Luckily, I did marry him, and we've been together for over 25 years. But in any event, I ended up going to law school. And so I practiced employment law, litigation, and counseling as the first part of my career. But I was in this women's group, and this woman was doing HR, and it was everything I had always thought I was going to do. And so I just said to her, hey, one day, if it doesn't work out, give me a call. I just love what you're doing. I love what you're talking about. And she called me 2 years later and said, hey, this job's open. Are you interested in transitioning to HR? And it just felt like the time was right. I'd had my first child, and I thought, you know what, I'm ready to make that move. So I transitioned into HR actually thinking that HR would be easier than practicing law. It was not by far. I joined an organization with over 6,000 employees and, large, diverse population. And so it was definitely a challenge, but it was a fun one. So then I spent time in my career growing. I had about 18 years in that organization, and it was awesome to be in an organization that truly cares about growth and giving you opportunities. And so I just continued to grow in that organization. And once I reached the executive level within HR, I did that for a number of years. And then they needed somebody to do government relations. And I said, can I do that too? I just thought it was a fun moment for me to broaden my perspective. Obviously, having the legal background that kind of fit well within my wheelhouse, and it was just exciting and different. And I think what's really interesting from an HR perspective is that oftentimes HR doesn't really get a seat at the table in the same way, and they're not always perceived as having the strategic chops to really make a difference. And so when I raised my hand rather to do government relations, I thought it really would broaden my perspective and help me be perceived more as a thought leader on my team and a strategic partner. And I think it helped me accomplish that. After that, I was given the opportunity to do even more administrative tasks. I took on kind of an outsourced IT model. I took on other administrative functions. In addition to HR, I kept HR the whole time. But it was a lot of fun.
Well, and I love your story. So what was it about? Tell me about like the values or the principles that you have that led you to constantly step out in faith around new areas to push and grow you, right? Because I don't know, I guess what I've felt myself and what I have found is the higher we go in our careers, the less, I don't know, bold and ambitious we tend to be, or there's more to lose around kind of staying in your lane around a particular area. Is there something about your principles or your values to play on there? Like, why did you do that?
So I think the common theme really throughout my career has been, how do I help organizations and people be their very best, whether that's in law or whether that's in HR or government relations or any role I've taken on. It's always been about helping people and organizations. So while it may seem like a big pivot, it really didn't feel like a big pivot to me. It was really just an extension of kind of what I'm passionate about, and that really fueled my growth.
I wonder if this sounds, relatable to you, but I feel like I have a little bit of that drive myself, where I love to kind of push myself a little bit and to see how far I can grow or how far I can do things. And even with my kids, I tell them, like, just try new things. Like, you never know which door you're going to open that you actually love. But what I found for me is that when I would try something new, even if it scared me a little bit, like starting this podcast, by the way, was a huge scary thing for me.
And you're fabulous at it.
Well, I'm getting there, right? I'm getting better every day, maybe. Thank you. Every time I tried something new and I got some bit of success, or I learned something and then got better the next time, it just built my confidence. And so now I'm at a point in my life where I really believe that anything is possible. I'm like, okay, we as a team, we can accomplish this goal. What's it going to take? Let's go do it. Whereas I might not have had that 20 years ago, right? I would have been more in the fear. So I think what so enamors me about your story is maybe there's somebody listening today that has a little bit of fear about taking that next step, or going through a door, or picking up a project internally at work that's a little bit outside their comfort zone, or going for that job that feels a little bit like a reach, to go for it, right? And you'll never regret that you did.
I think that's very well said. I mean, I think part of it is just about having kind of an optimism and a confidence that anything is possible, to your point. And I do love it when you get those affirmations and wins and something feels good. You've worked really hard and you accomplish a goal, and then you're like, oh, that was awesome.
So your latest transition is a really, really big one. I mean, leaving a really high-powered corporate executive job and going out on your own, starting your own business. I really am excited to talk to you about this, because in my experience, and a lot of people talking to me since I put out this podcast, is there's a lot of people who are sitting right now where you were, right? Careers going great, big positions, lots of authority, lots of leadership, remit under their belt, that are feeling this maybe a little bit of discontent, ready for something new, but haven't quite made the mental decision to go out, step out in faith and try something new. So tell me about your last transition, how you go from high-powered executive at Roper to now starting your own business.
I think it was really an interesting journey for me. I think, we just talked about the fact that I raise my hand and say yes a lot, right? And I'm looking for new challenges and opportunities. I will say there is a cautionary tale with that too, right? At some point when you say yes enough, it can become too much. And I think I had a moment in my career where, I was leaving work one night to try and get to a child's chorus performance. I have 3 kids. Of course, one's in college and 2 are in high school. But I was trying to get to this chorus performance, and I was running late. And I still had a work call that I had to take. And I'm taking the Zoom call from the car. I'm driving as fast as I can. I look down. I have no gas, right? Of course that would happen. I have no gas. And I have to stop and get gas. So I pull in, put the nozzle in the tank, and then I jump back in the car to stay on my Zoom, right? Because I'm trying to be present for this meeting for work. And I get so engrossed in the meeting that before I know it, I turn on the car and I actually just drove off, which was crazy. So nozzle is still in the gas tank.
Oh.
Yes. So here's the good news. The good news is that gas stations have actually air-approved for crazy people like me, and the actual right, and the hose actually does detach from the top of the gas pump. So that's good news. The bad news is then you are the crazy lady driving down the road with the gas nozzle in your car and the little hose, trailing behind you, and I was mortified. Right, people are honking at me. I'm still on a Zoom call. I'm late. I pull over and I just realize this is too much. It's too much. And I'm not even sure I've told my family that story. So this is, but it was one of those moments where I was just, I realized something has to give. And I started to really think about my priorities in life and what made the most sense. At the same time, my organization was going through tremendous change. So one of the members of our organization had become a greater than 51%, share, and ultimately they were going to change the model of the way we did business to move shared services up to kind of the mothership, I would say, and they did that for scale, and that makes a lot of sense in lots of organizational structures. So I helped them do that, but it just seemed like the right time and a natural fit to maybe think about something else. I could have stayed, but it was really, I think, time. And it to your point, there was that calling of, I've been doing so much. Maybe it's time to try and do it a little differently and redefine my priorities.
Wow. If it makes you feel any better, I have a story like that too. I don't even know if I want to share it. It's really
Please
bad.
Do.
I mean, yours
Please
sounds...
do. Mine was terrible. So tell yours.
Ethan, my youngest, was probably 12 or 13, and he was at soccer practice. And I thought that my husband, Jeff, was going to pick him up. But he poked his head into my office where I was practicing for a big presentation that day. I made the presentation. I was like, practicing saying it. And he said, "Hey, I have something else I have to do. Can you pick up Ethan in an hour?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
Well, sure enough, I got so engrossed in practicing my presentation for the next day for work that I forgot to pick up Ethan. And meanwhile, he's calling me and I didn't see. So I eventually got there and it was dark and he was sitting by himself and he's like, "Mom, the owls are like hooing." And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so terrible.
And we've all been there as moms. Yeah.
We have, but it was a huge wake up call because we're going to make mistakes as parents. But for me, I was so engrossed over here. And it was just one of those things. My friend Carissa Allen, that I used to work with at Microsoft, she's amazing. She said, sometimes life gives us shoves in the right direction, sometimes violent shoves in the right direction. I call that, sort of that small voice that is gnawing at you, where on paper, everything is going right. Your job was going great. You had tons of opportunities. My job was going great at the time when I decided to transition from Microsoft. But there was like this voice, the small, still voice saying, there's something more that you're supposed to be doing or something different, or maybe just an overall feeling like, as women, we're supposed to be able to have it all. And I think we can, but maybe not all at the same time. So anyway, I applaud you. And I would just say if that's going on for some people who are listening, maybe pay attention to that little voice before you start ripping out, gas station nozzles or just supporting your child at the soccer field. I don't know.
Right.
So anyway, gosh, I wanted that to feel cathartic, but I just feel terrible about it all over again. So,
I know. It never feels good.
It never feels good. It never feels good. So, so you decided, okay, so you know what? It's time for me to move on. And tell us about your transition. How do you go from that, big corporate executive to now starting your own business, Culture Wins?
So I think part of it, honestly, was just taking time to listen and figure it out. And I'm so thankful. So my husband was incredibly supportive, and he said, Melanie, you really should take a few minutes and really be thoughtful about this. And so he kind of blessed me taking a mini sabbatical, and I had never really taken time off. So I spent a few minutes just trying to come down from that executive high that I'd been on and think about, what do I want to be in this next phase of my life and on this journey? And that really took a lot of introspection. I reached out to a friend and mentor. Her name is Karen Frazier. She's amazing. I had worked with her in my executive career, but she had transitioned to do kind of life coaching. And I've never done life coaching before. I didn't do a lot of self-help stuff, but I was like, you know what? Let's see what this is about. It's called reinvention coaching. Let's try it. And so it was a really beautiful process, not rocket science, but just the ability to intentionally write down your goals, your mission, what it is that you care about, what your strengths are, where your opportunities are. It taught me how to just take a deep breath and focus on myself a little bit, and how to administer some self-care so that you could then be your very best as you move forward. But through that process, I really redefined success for myself. So I really thought it was not, or rather it was no longer the top job, right, with the most money and the highest I could go. It was really about, how do I, lead with my faith? How do I make sure that I am the very best person to show up for my family and for my husband and for my children? How do I make sure that I'm prioritizing my health? How do I make sure I'm prioritizing my community, and doing all of that within the context of something I'm passionate about with work where I can make a difference? That is success to me now. And it's not that it wasn't that for me before, but I had not really intentionally laid it out that way. And I hadn't really thought about, what are the steps I need to take in each of those areas to make sure I'm successful in each of those areas, right? It had really been focused on just the work aspect before. And then you get kind of unbalanced in your life. And so for me, that shift was really important.
Amazing. The intentionality is the word that I picked up on, right?
Right.
Could you have gone through that process while you were still at Roper, do you think?
I think I could have, but it would have been much harder. I mean, part of it was having just the quiet space to think. When you're in executive world, often your mind is going 1,000 different directions, and you're prioritizing so many different things for your work, your family, your life. I mean, you're going so fast. And this really said, I need to slow down and think. So could you? Yes, but it would require really prioritizing quiet time, perhaps on the weekends or after hours, to be really intentional.
How did you honor that quiet time? I'm sure as soon as you left, all the people that have experienced Melanie at some point were reaching out to you, wanting you to do different things. I know David McNair probably reached out to you right away, right?
He did.
How did you honor that quiet time? I did not do that. It's one of the things I wish I had done.
I think that's a great question. I mean, you're right. I had offers to go be, an executive in other organizations the very first week I left, and I just had to say, you know what? I need a minute. And so I have to say, I credit my family for being just such a huge support on this. But I didn't realize I was going to take as much time as I took initially. So I kept setting myself with these little mini goals, right? I'd say, okay, well, I'm going to give myself a month. Like, I'll give myself a month of quiet time and let's see what happens. And then I'd kind of get to the end of that month and I'd be like, I think I need a little bit more time. And so then I took 2 more months and I'd say, okay, let's get to this marker. And then I took 6 months. And I think really at the end of 6 months, I knew at that point that I was probably going to pivot into consulting and really kind of try something different. But I still didn't lean all the way in for quite some time. It took me almost a year to fully lean into kind of what was next. And it was really cathartic to kind of take time and kind of be very intentional about it.
I went through a similar process when I left Microsoft. I realized about myself that I was so good at planning from a work perspective, setting business goals, creating an annual plan, breaking that down. But when it came to my own personal life planning, right? Starting with creating a personal mission statement for myself. What is it that I want to do with my life? I read this book Halftime, and it's about success to significance. And so what does transitioning from success to significance look like for Jamie? I realized I was a terrible planner, but everything that you're talking about is exactly where eventually I had gotten to. I wish I had somebody to help guide me, which is setting the goals, identifying the goals, setting the goals, building a work plan to get there, and having this, sort of North Star around, what personal success looks like. We get so caught up, I think, in just a busy life. You graduate college. If you do well, you get a great job, you work hard at that job, and then your personal life's getting busier. If you're fortunate as well, you're, finding your life partner, maybe having kids. Everything was on autopilot, and it was good, right? Like life was good.
Absolutely.
And now being able to step back and say, okay, well, I need to kind of recenter here, is a really big deal. And something I'm still, frankly, working on.
Well, I think we all are. And I think what I've realized on this journey is just, goodness gracious, how important relationships are too, right? I think one of my huge learnings on this whole journey was just how leaning into your network is like a real thing. Like, I had this big network, I had all these great people in my life, and I was thankful. But when you're in your executive role, it's not that I took them for granted, but we were just kind of going through the motions of the executive role. And then when you kind of step back and you're trying to figure out your next path, I was really leaning in to say, no, really help me think about some of these things. No, how did you do this? No, tell me what you learned on the way. Where did you fail? What should I be thinking of differently? And it was incredible how many people would be very honest about what worked and what didn't work. I mean, people are willing to tell their story if you're willing to ask. And so I have to thank you. You were one of those people that I went and said, Jamie, how do I do this? And you gave me so many really important pieces of advice. And one of them is a story that you told me that I thought was really meaningful to me, was just about just your journey, right? You just started by starting, right? You don't have to have the perfect picture of what it is, but you just need to start. And then kind of your passion will find you on the journey. And I think you started working and you did some consulting at first, and then you really pivoted more towards coaching rather. And you realized that coaching was really where you had passion, and it kind of found you. And so I have really tried to be very open on this journey and see what's going to find me.
Amazing. I love watching what you're doing. Well, I want to go and I want to talk about what you're doing now and what are you seeing out there in the world and where businesses need help with culture wins. Before we do that, though, I do want to click down a little bit on your leadership principles. You've been so successful as a leader and guided teams. Tell me about your style. What worked well for you, or some of the leadership principles that you brought into your corporate career that you're bringing forward now as a founder?
I think that at my core, I would say I'm a servant leader, right? My goal is to lead with humility and helping others be their very best selves. I think that's kind of my core. I think as you grow in executive leadership, your style has to change to some extent, right? By the end, I think I had to really embrace more transformational leadership principles and styles, but always kind of staying true, I think, to servant leadership along the way. I think some of the things that are really important there are creating very deep, authentic relationships and kind of creating the trusted space so that people felt safe telling you when you were driving them crazy, to be honest, right?
And that I know, doesn't happen.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And it does for every leader. But if you've created an environment where your team feels okay to tell you when you're driving them crazy, like, to me, that's the ultimate win, because you're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. But it's how do we listen to our team? How do we thank them for giving us that feedback? And then how do we do better, right? And that just makes us a stronger and better leader in the long run. And that really helped me on my journey.
I think a lot about these leadership stages. You start out you're leading as an individual contributor, and then you move on to a first line leader, and then sort of a second line leader, and then maybe eventually a broad business leader like you were. What was as you moved into like a broad business leader? You mentioned your leadership had to change a little bit. What was the biggest thing, or a couple of the biggest things that you noticed, and how did you have to up your game or change your leadership style as you moved from that, sort of leading a small team or a small team of teams to a broad leader?
I think probably the biggest change, and really as I got higher up, was really having to kind of lift your eyes up and kind of look broadly and vision more, and kind of think about impact across different units, different businesses, different organization versus kind of your specific silo. So kind of lift your eyes up, look broader, and then create kind of that inspirational or galvanizing vision to help people get behind it and get excited about potential changes that were happening. So healthcare is the industry I was in, and I mean, it changes often and fast, and it sometimes feels like change on top of change on top of change. And so really being able to explain the why behind the what and help people understand the value was really important. And that transformed for me over time.
I think you hit on something that I see, especially as I coach senior leaders, this tension line between, usually a senior leader comes up on a leadership team. They are representing a function, in your case, HR, government relations at some point. And so absolutely, you have to be the biggest advocate. You have to be for that function.
Right.
You have to know what's going on. You have to drive and represent really well. But what you said about looking around and looking for the connective tissue and thinking about the broader vision, that right there is probably 20% of what I coach with senior leaders, right? How do you put your head up and go from, you'll always be that, the big evangelist of that function. But
Right.
if you really want to be an impactful leader, it's understanding where your function fits in and how you create value across the organization. I love that you said that. It's hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard, but it's exciting. I mean, I think that's where I started getting the adrenaline rush of it all, right? When you could really see and connect all the dots, and that got really fun.
Excellent. Amazing. Were there any mistakes along the way? Anything that you look back from and you're like, yeah, okay. It was a hard learning, but I learned from it and moved on, that you want to share?
There were a ton of mistakes along the way. I mean, I think any leader who says they didn't make mistakes is not being honest. I mean, we all make mistakes. I'm sure there's a ton of stories. I guess one that jumps out probably earlier in my career was really more around probably perfectionism. I've got one of those tendencies where I feel like I need to be perfect at all times. And I think that can hinder you in two areas specifically. So one of them would be from a productivity perspective, and the other would be kind of from a relationship perspective. So when you think of perfectionism from a productivity perspective, obviously the tendency to want to make it perfect and sit on it doesn't really work in a fast-paced environment where people are waiting for you to make decisions in order to advance their work. So I think I was frustrating people early in career. And I had to really kind of learn kind of the 80-20 principle, right? Which is that 80% of the outcomes are driven by 20% of your actions. And so if I could just focus on the critical few, then I could have a lot greater impact and I could do it faster and be more decisive. So that was a learning that I had to kind of make early in career. Nice. To say, how do I pivot from perfectionism to kind of the 80-20 of what's the big nugget that's going to have the most impact. The second way I think perfectionism, or the learning rather, that I had to kind of go through was about relationships. So, I had this persona, I think, where I just tried to project that I was perfect all the time. And I remember one day I was talking to one of my direct reports, and I actually was kind of having a vulnerable mom moment. And I kind of admitted something where I just had not done something right with one of my kids. And she finally looked at me and she said, "Oh, thank God, you are human," right? And I think it was a breakthrough moment for me where I realized that vulnerability actually leads to authenticity, and it helps you build deeper relationships than a facade of perfection ever would. And so it helped me let go of having to be perfect in situations and actually lean in to being more vulnerable and authentic.
Amazing. Gosh, you reminded me of a story. I had I definitely have a pretty high, I guess what's a high ability to just take on stuff or ambiguity, right?
Right.
So when I would stand in front of my team and there was clearly some headwind, some issues in our business that we were trying to solve for, or lots of ambiguity, I could pretty authentically stand in front of my team and be like, "It's great. Come on, follow me. Like, we're in good shape." Like, that felt really authentic.
Right.
At the same time, one day I was in a one-on-one with one of the leaders on my team, and he said to me, "Jamie, can I ask you a question? Do you really think everything is just fine? Like, do you never get frustrated about anything?" And I was like, "No, like I'm frustrated about a lot of things. Like, we have a lot of work to do." And he said, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah.
I literally thought that you just didn't have any cares in the world about this stuff. And I thought to myself, well, have I just overdone that good quality? Have I not painted a picture of just the reality of how challenging it's going to be while I'm bringing all of that, optimism to the table, right? And
Absolutely.
So I had a similar kind of experience, and I was like, oh no. And then I think I spent the next 10 minutes maybe overdoing the other side. Let me tell you all of the terrible things going on in the business, and probably, got him all upset. No, I'm just kidding. But
I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure it was great. But no, my team gave me a cup that said, "It's fine. It's fine. No, really, I'm fine." Right. And it's kind of that moment of like, truly everything's fine, but it's really not always fine. And we do have to be able to, lead with authenticity and share that things are not perfect, and that things are going to be hard, but we can get there together if we just, persevere.
That's great. The perfection, and sort of moderating around that. I think as we get into later stages and higher levels of leadership, just recognizing that the weight of your words gets heavier and heavier. The weight of your actions gets heavier and heavier. And so this, for me, one of the things that still to this day, but definitely earlier in my career, I would get upset about, would be like, "Oh, that wasn't my intention," and it was like, okay, well, it doesn't matter what your intention. I mean, it matters, but it's not good enough, especially the more senior you go, that your intention to come across one way is this. You have to make sure that you really understand how your words and your actions are coming across to your team to drive the desired effect that you're wanting to have. And it is a lot less exhausting when you can just be real and authentic, right?
It is, and I think you're right. The higher you get, the more impact your words and actions have. I have to really work hard at not being as direct as I otherwise would be, and that's a skill that I also have to work on. Right, I'm a pretty direct person, and I would write my email very directly, like da 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 da, do this, and then I'd say, "Good morning. Thank you so much." I had to actually go back in and add the beginning and the ending just to try and really lead with care, lead with empathy, try and not be as direct, and help people understand that, that I cared.
What's so funny? For me, I have a mission statement that I went through after I left Microsoft in this process, but my mantra is love and encourage, right? So that's my normal.
I love
that's
that.
How I'm.
That's great.
That's how I live into. So for me, being direct was something I had to build, right? So then throughout my career, I would need to give direct feedback or constructive feedback. This was a hard thing for me to do, and then I got better and better at it. And then I felt like, oh my gosh, if you really care about the person, which I did, love and encourage, then you can pretty much say anything because it's coming from that place, and you can get to the other side. And then almost like a monster was created. I was just being direct on everything. And I had to learn how to moderate that back. And still to this day, every once in a while, when I think I'm being really helpful in my directness, I'll like let it fly. And I see the other person across the table from me with their eyes wide open, like, I'm like, oh, too much. So still like having to moderate all of that. But for you, it's funny for me to hear, not funny, but it's interesting for me to hear you needed to kind of tone up maybe the warmth a little bit. Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite.
Okay. So. And on the perfection, on the 80-20, I just wanted to ask you this. So I think a lot of people experience this idea that what got you to where you were as an individual contributor was that attention to detail, that great result-oriented, like caring about the little things that make you stand out, right? And as you grow in your career, you had to let some of that go and move to the 80-20. How specifically did you do that? Because it's one thing knowing that that's something you need to do. Like, how were you able to let go that, that bit of last bit of perfection to move to that 80-20. Any insights on that?
I would say probably understanding the impact it was having on my team was how it, it's
Okay.
again, inviting that feedback from them. I know, obviously I came up through being a lawyer. Lawyers write all the time, and I was an editor for the Law Review, so I kind of thought I was reasonably good at writing. And so my team would give me things that they had written, and I thought my job was to just edit it so beautifully that they'd be proud of the end product, right? And what I really realized over time was that by editing their work that much, I was really saying what you did wasn't valued, and what I do is more important than you. And over time, they stopped even trying, and I was having to work so much harder because
So
I had basically thwarted their self-confidence, and they were writing great. It was great stuff. I was just trying to add too much value.
Do you mean when they gave something to you, they're like, well, I'm not going to put the extra effort into this because Melanie's just going to red pen it anyway?
She's just going to red pen it anyway.
Yeah.
And so finally I had to learn this principle well, because, it was stifling their ability to grow, and it was inhibiting our ability to be the very best we could be on our team. So by letting go and just saying, yes, it's great, right? And stopping all that.
And it was creating more work for you because you weren't getting the best first draft.
Absolutely.
So interesting. I do wonder how many leaders inadvertently are creating more work for themselves as their schedule is getting busier and busier, and they're trying for that elusive balance and managing everything. How much are we doing? How much are the development areas that we are working on actually creating some of that extra work and stress in our lives? So it's something very interesting to think about.
I know. I mean, I again, this is a direct report where I literally was just so thankful, right? That she told me, right? And she was really direct and honest about how it made her feel. And then I said, well, then let's do better, and let's figure out a different way to do it. And that's when I really had to kind of lift my eyes up and say, I'm going to do this differently going forward. And it's been a great lesson learned.
There's a episode that I want to link in the show notes that I put out, like a really short video. It was called "Does Bad News Travel Fast in Your Organization?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's relevant here. I don't want to get into here, but what you just described about creating the conditions such that you would have somebody on your team feel comfortable enough to tell you when you were missing the mark around helping her do her best or him do his best. That's creating the conditions for bad news to travel fast, in this case, one-to-one in your organization. So I want to link that in the show notes. I would encourage people to listen to that because it speaks directly to what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you don't lead in a way that creates kind of that genuine care and concern and compassion and love, that person wouldn't have been comfortable sharing that with me. And yet it was so important that she did. So I'm so thankful.
Amazing. Well, let's shift to your current business now, Culture Wins. Congratulations on setting that up. It's been under a year, just a few months, right?
Yeah, it's been under a year.
So tell us about that. And more importantly, what problems are you seeing out there with organizations that your business is out there to solve?
Thanks for asking.
Sure.
So when I created Culture Wins, I really was just trying to think about ways I could help people, but also what are the things that I just absolutely loved to do in my role that I think I could add value to other organizations. And so I kind of put the work into 3 lanes. So one lane is kind of the strategic HR workforce, partnering. One lane is really around kind of boards and board service, and one lane's around leadership. So when you think about kind of the HR and workforce lane, what I really see is there's just a ton of small to mid-size organizations that they have really great HR people who really want to do the right thing for their organizations, but they are resource constrained, and they are just doing what they can do to keep the organization moving forward, right? They're the nuts and bolts to get it going right. And so what I love to be able to do is come along and be kind of that higher level strategic partner where I can say, okay, you're doing all these things right, but let's lift our eyes up and think about culture more broadly, and how do we create that really, exceptional culture, exceptional employee experience? How do we think about creating kind of scalable models of leadership that we can then replicate throughout the organization as we grow? how do we help our emerging leaders be even more successful on the journey? So I could kind of come alongside them and help them think about some more strategic HR things that they haven't had the bandwidth really to do. So that's fun. In larger organizations, what I find is they have strategic HR, they've got it, they're working hard, but they have an acquisition, right? It came out of left field. They didn't even know they were going to have this acquisition. And all of a sudden they have an entirely new work stream that they have to execute on at a high level. And I'm the kind of person that can come in and partner with them and augment their HR workforce to say, how can I help you be even more successful with this massive initiative you have, whether it's an HR transformation initiative, whether it's implementing a new HRIS system or some sort of technology, AI and workforce. What are things that I can do to kind of come alongside you and be your strategic partner? So that's super fun. And
Amazing.
then kind of lastly, I do interim and executive, kind of fractional HR support for organizations if they have kind of somebody who moves on quickly and they need some support.
Amazing. I know we have, I have some listeners who are senior leaders or CEOs of small to mid-sized organizations. 3 of my clients I can think of today have asked me, and we've had conversations in the past 6 months about when is the right time to start expanding out, an HR function right inside the organization. And it's hard to make these kind of decisions as a small or mid-sized business. Also, I met a founder through some of my board work, and I was listening. I was doing my homework ahead of time before I met him, and he'd been on some recent podcasts, and all he was talking about was culture. And I was like, ooh, I love talking about culture. We're going to hit it off. And the first question, I was like, hey, you talk a lot about culture. You're really passionate about it, aren't you? And his answer kind of surprised me. He's like, actually, I never was before, but I'm finding at this stage in my company that which is about 75 million. He's like, I have to spend way more time than I ever thought on it. So I have to learn it. And it wasn't really from a place of passion. I think it was from a place of necessity, which I thought was really interesting. And in my experience, you have these amazing leaders, founders, or small and mid-sized leaders who are just so amazing at their function that now are sitting back and saying, but wait, like, why am I spending so much time on the culture of the organization and where we're heading, especially during times of uncertainty?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think there's all kinds of evidence out there that shows that when you focus on your people and when you treat your people right, obviously they treat your customers right, and that propels your business forward. And so I think great CEOs know that, and they focus on it intentionally. But it does take intentionality, and I'll just use that word again. I mean, it takes an actual intentional effort and a strategy around how you're going to achieve great culture. And that's what I love to help people do.
Amazing. Well, best of luck with your organization. I know you're already very busy. And in fact, I was joking around with you. I was like, okay, you need to start entering that phase of when you're whittling it down and getting really precise. And you're like, I just love everything I'm doing. I do that as well. So I know you'll continue to be very, very successful.
Well,
as we start to wrap up, any final career advice that you would give? Let's start with early in career individuals. Somebody's in, relatively early in the career. They got this great job. They're in this function. They're doing well on the scorecard. They're, everything looks great. They can see a future and they can see the path around their promotion. But maybe they're sitting back and they're like, maybe it was you when you were an attorney and you're saying, you know what, this doesn't feel exactly like my passion. What advice would you give to somebody at that career stage?
Yeah, I think for early careerists, I would say, again, really embrace growth mindset, really embrace learning, lean in and raise your hand for new stretch opportunities and ways to broaden your perspective, even if it's lateral. I think some of the very best moves for early careerists are lateral moves, because I think it truly broadens your perspective so that when you get to that next level role, you have such a better perspective.
Amazing.
Right. And so I really encourage people to think not just vertically, but horizontally.
Terrific. And what about on the other side, these are very senior leaders in organizations, not ready to fully retire from the workforce yet, but things are going great. They could envision themselves another 10 years continuing to contribute, enjoy themselves. But there's this, I don't even know how to describe it, Melanie. It's this little bit of gnawing, this little bit of something pulling them towards something else. What kind of advice would you give to that person?
I think for folks who are higher up in their careers, I think at some point we all come to kind of this crossroads where we say, what's our purpose and what are we meant to do in life? And is this it? Or is it something else? And I would say lean into that inner voice and take the time to really create space to be intentional about reflection, and think about where you are in your journey and what does success look like for you. I know in my busy executive life, while I was a faith-filled person, I was not being faithful in my everyday practice. And so giving myself space and time to redefine success, to say, I actually need to lean into my faith more, was really important to me and has led to just much greater peace and joy on my journey. And also redefining success to really focus on kind of the well-being aspects of life and how do you bring your whole self to work. So I guess I would say the more success you get, the more you need to step back and reflect and make sure that it's fulfilling you all the way around in your work and your life.
Thank you for that. By the way, so I have been trying to become more and more comfortable with sharing my faith, which is something I never did when I was at work. And I probably put it on the back burner like you did, like you're describing you did.
Yeah.
But I had to say, just this morning, as I was waiting for you to show up, I was reading an email from Arlen Sorensen. He sends it every single day, and I read his email. And he always quotes scripture. And this is the scripture, I kid you not, that it was talking about a move from success to significance. And it was James 4:8. Come near to God, and he will come near to you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
All about,
I love that.
You're sitting there searching for your purpose. So I happen to notice when I get the scripture like 15 minutes before something.
Right.
So I felt like I needed to share that if there was a good opportunity. So thank you for sharing your faith and allowing me to step out more confidently in my faith. One more thing I'll share is my friend Mike Noonan sent me a book. It's called Strength to Strength. And in like the very first chapter, it was kind of depressing. It was like, every single one of us, even if we're at the apex of our careers and we are flying high,
right,
it will come to an end. It's just a matter of time. And so
great.
I know, isn't that like really encouraging? And so are you focused on figuring out how you make that transition, when to make that transition so that you can truly step into the significance and the next curve of strength, right? I'll link to this book in the notes as well. But it sort of hit me in the face and I was like, oh my God, that's so depressing. But the more I thought about it, it's true, right? There will be a transition today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And how are you catching that next curve as you're doing? You're catching that next curve around contribution in a way that works for your whole life, which is pretty amazing.
That's fabulous. I can't wait to read that book.
Yeah. Just get past the first chapter where it's a little discouraging and then it gets better. Absolutely
Okay.
Promise you
Stick
that.
with it. I'll do it.
Are there any books or frameworks that come to mind for you that were impactful for you around your leadership journey? It doesn't have to be about this current transition. But just throughout.
Sure. I love The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor.
Oh,
I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's really the premise that if you lead with optimism and resilience and positivity, essentially, that will lead to success versus the opposite. Success leads to happiness and productivity. So it's really flipping the paradigm, inverting it and saying, how can you lead with gratitude and how you can lead with grace and happiness. And I've always been just a really positive and optimistic person. And so to me, it really spoke to me. How can we infuse that in organizations? Because nobody likes to be by the person who's always negative, right? We always want to be around that person that's bringing light into a room.
Yeah, you're like a magnet when you can be like that. Right? I love that inversion. Okay, I'm adding that to my list as well.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I can already tell the way you describe it. I'm going to love it.
Yes,
so,
it's good.
Fantastic. All right, Melanie. Well, gosh, this time flew by. So thank you for being here. If you could wrap by giving just one piece of advice about leadership, what would that be?
So this was hard. I think I wrote down about 6 different statements that I was going to say. And even as I sit here, I'm not sure which one I'm going to land on. I will just say that I think for where I am right now on my journey, I would say I think folks should really focus on their own well-being as part of their leadership journey. And I think that, we're in a really divisive time, culturally, politically, there's a lot going on and people are really struggling in the workplace. And they're struggling maybe because of things they're bringing from their personal lives, maybe because of the uncertainty of work right now and kind of the dynamics of change and things that are happening in our world. And I think we have to be tuned into that. And so I would say focus on your own well-being, take care of yourself so that you can take care of others and help them on their journey. Part of that is being willing to grow and lean into growth and learning, because I think learning also helps take you there. And then make sure you're doing something you're passionate about in life. When you're passionate about what you're doing, it comes out and it makes all the difference in the world. And so I hope people can find their passion and then execute.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for that. I'm glad you chose that one.
Good.
As you were saying you had 6, I was thinking, of course she does. She's a complete overachiever. I asked for 1. She's prepared to talk about 6.
I love it.
Well, listen, best of luck to you with culture wins and all that you're doing. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please continue to join us for insider access to executive leadership.